For the first time in 5.5 seasons and what seems like decades, the Sixers will enter this season without Tobias Harris on roster. While they turn their attention to greener pastures with Paul George being a part of this roster, seems that some Sixers fans still have not let go of the Tobias era. I'm going to break down a little spat that is going down on social media and speak my mind why I think this needs to stop from a Sixers fan's perspective, as well as highlight why they're in such a good place because of Tobias to an extent. Now, to dive right into things, I'm going to start off with this occurred on Instagram here, and Tobias Harris tweeting a picture of him in a Pistons jersey, kind of a new era type post for him. And a couple comments from some Sixers fans here saying, stole money for years from the Sixers, to which Tobias bites back and says, send me your Venmo, I'll send it to you. And then another guy saying, please never come back to Philly, to which Tobias replies, I forgot you own the city, LOL. And these did continue with a couple more comments here. Thank God you ain't in Philly anymore, which Tobias replies with a 100 emoji. Back to Philly, please, which I don't know who wrote that one, but that might be the most controversial of them. And then another one saying, you really let us down, Toby, which he replies with a laughing face here. Now, while I totally get the sentiment from everybody here, this is something where I think we just need to move on. That to give the reality of the situation with Tobias Harris, I don't think it's as much on his shoulders as really people hold him to. That yes, he was not what the Sixers team needed to be. But I think Tobias was put in shoes that he was incapable of filling. This was not a guy who, did not show up to play, was not mentally prepared, wasn't making excuses. He just simply wasn't as good as the Sixers were asking him to be. And that was more of a problem from the Sixers' perspective for handing him a check that his play was unable to cash. And because of Tobias, it paved the way for a guy named Paul George to walk into the Sixers team. That we had to grind like that to shine like this to see this big three in Philadelphia. And particularly when looking back at the past couple seasons in Philly with Tobias, sure, you can make the case and the accurate case that moving on from him at that point in time would have given the Sixers a better chance to win a championship in that season. But what the calculation on Daryl Morey's part is that he was worthy of more than just a crumble cookie. And what really the team could benefit from was allowing his contract to come off the books completely and open up that max slot space. And with that happening, that's what turned into Paul George. So while we can look back in frustration on the Tobias Harris era, that's going to be one that I put quickly to rest. And I will even go as far as to say that when the Detroit Pistons come to play the Sixers in Philadelphia this year, and by the way, it does look a little strange seeing Tobias back in that uniform there, looking a little bit different than the first time when he was in Detroit. I also will say, I think he's in a pretty good spot for Tobias at this point in his career, that I think like his real outlook as a player, what he's at his best is that kind of veteran leader type thing to a young team. And what he's destined to do is take a really bad basketball team and make them only a kind of bad basketball team. That's why I think Detroit's a great spot for him. He's not a missing piece on a championship contender, but he can take you from a 25-win team to a 33-win team. That's right in Tobias Harris's niche right there. But where I was going was when he does make his return to Philadelphia, I don't think he should be booed out of his pants. I don't think this is a Ben Simmons situation. This is not a guy who quit on the team, forced his way out. The reality is, once again, he just was not as good enough as he was paid to be or the Sixers needed him to be. This was not about Tobias Harris not playing to his peak. The reality was his peak was not what the Sixers evaluated it to be. And to give one kind of shred of positives, shout out to our guy Paul Reed, also holding things down in Detroit over there. Kind of cool to see Paul Reed get another chance. And I do think in a new setting with kind of a different environment, he might end up being a guy that shines. I know he's made some early impressions in camp as I was prepping for this video here. Saw a couple quotes of guys speaking really highly of Paul Reed and what he brought from kind of an energy standpoint, which we're all quite familiar with. So overall, really excited there. But once again, to reflect on Tobias Harris, we know who he is as a player. That just last season, 17.2 points per game, 6.5 rebounds, shot just 35.3% from three, 40.3% from the corner. The idea of Tobias Harris is so much better than the actuality. The frustrating things like pump faking out of three-pointers just to take a tough contested two, or trying to back yourself into a post position when Joel Embiid is also on the floor. There was a lot of maddening things with Tobias. His hips just don't move in the way that a elite level athlete should. He can't slide on the perimeter with these top tier perimeter creators. It's really frustrating stuff. That the holes in his game are just maddening things. But the reality is we can put that to rest from a Sixers fan perspective here. That now we do have another guy, a guy by the name of Paul George, who will be holding things down and playing for the Sixers team. That I can't overstate the gap between Paul George, the basketball player, and Tobias Harris. That yes, Paul George has his flaws. He's not perfect. But this is a guy who just last season on, I wouldn't say a down year, but not in the peak of his career, had a better season than Tobias Harris has ever posted. At 34 years old, he's coming off a season in which he averaged 22.6 points per game, shot 41.3% from three, 47.1% from the field overall, and 45.7% from the corner. The most difficult leap to make in basketball, period, is when you go from this very good player to true all-star. That's why I'm skeptical of the OG Anunobys and Mikal Bridges, that them looking to be true top-tier 3-and-D options for the Knicks. I just don't know if they're capable of taking that type of leap. I think Mikal Bridges was a clear example of a guy who you kind of found out where his ceiling is. That first stint when he was initially traded to Brooklyn, that like 25-game sample size to conclude that season, he looked terrific. That the numbers were off the charts. Then when you get a full year sample size, you get a chance for him to attempt to be the guy. You realize he can't be. I feel similarly about OG Anunoby, although those reasons have more to do with his body and his physicality. But Tobias Harris is an example of a player who was unable to take that next step. That was the expectation when the Sixers did hand him that contract, is he could grow into one of these real deal 3-and-D wing type players that are really running the NBA these days. Paul George is a guy who has been there, done that, and has a t-shirt about it. That he's a 9-time All-Star, has been that guy in a variety of settings. We've seen him be a number one option on teams. We've seen him be more of a complimentary piece, and now he's in a perfect spot to serve in this big three, playing alongside Joel Embiid and Tyrese Maxey. And Paul George himself seems super excited about the opportunity. I've been pretty impressed with basically every time that he has hopped on the mic and spoken his mind. I think he's handled himself really impressively so far. Now, granted, that only matters for now, that when we check rock, play basketball, we got stuff to break down on the court. That's obviously all we're going to be judging off, but it's still encouraging to see that some of this podcast savvy and suave feeling about him does carry over to these media sessions. I've been impressed with what's come out of his mouth. He's been very complimentary of Tyrese Maxey, of Joel Embiid, of Nick Nurse, Daryl Morey, and the entire roster that the Sixers team has, and it does feel like the vibes are absolutely there. There are no longer these guys that you're incapable of winning. There are no longer the Tobias Harrises on the Sixers roster. We have guys like the legitimate MVP in Joel Embiid, a guy who was averaging 34.7 points per game before he got hurt last year. There is Tyrese Maxey, who is all is being talked about right now is this next step that he's going to be taking. And let's not forget, he's coming off a season in which he just cracked an All-Star game for his first time and won Most Improved. And the fact that there's another step coming, that this is talked about like it's a certainty by everyone within the Sixers organization, I think is terrific news for this team. So overall, let's enjoy the moment where we're at. That all this process era, all these failed opportunities, the Jimmy Butler swings, the James Harden situation, this all led to this current team. So let's focus on this. Let's be ready to ride for this season. Let's zero in on this Sixers team, and let's leave everything that is in the past in the past. Let Tobias Harris go enjoy the rest of his career in basketball purgatory out there in Detroit. We will deal with it when he comes to Philadelphia and address things head on there. But I don't think there should be this hate in their heart for Tobias Harris that some Sixers fans clearly seem to have. I have no issue with it for portraying that for the Ben Simmons of the world, the guys that I truly feel wrong in the Sixers team. I think the failures that Tobias Harris really put upon the organization were more of the organization's doing than Tobias's. I think he was asked to be something that he's not, and the reality is Tobias Harris is exactly who he's always been. So shout out to Toby out in Detroit. Hopefully that once again, I do think he fits his basketball peak or his ideal role of taking a 25-win team to a 33-win team. That's about the ballpark of what I think his impact is. He's not a guy who can play a major role on a championship contender, just about in any sort of role there. So shout out to Tobias. Shout out to you guys for tuning in this video here, and let's keep it cool in the comments for Tobias from now on. Shout out to him. We will see how things go from here, but appreciate each and every one of you guys tuning into this video. I cannot wait for the season to officially begin with the Sixers team. They're out in the Bahamas, kicking off training camp right now. I'm going to have a ton more content coming out as far as some outlooks, some things we're hearing from camp. Going to do a little bit of a deep dive on Gershon Yabusele and what I think he can bring to the Sixers team. So the best way to stay in the loop with all that is to smash that subscribe button here. Make sure you're doing that. Drop a like on this video in your comments below, and I'll be talking to you next time right here on Sixers Digest. Peace.